Two little sisters face a dilemma. Their mother will not be able to attend the Family Day presentation. In a brave gesture, they invite an elegant stranger to pretend to be their father. But what begins as an innocent fantasy reveals a real bond that changes the destiny of everyone involved. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you will hear in your life. The afternoon sun streamed through the gaps in the faded curtain, drawing golden stripes on the polished concrete floor of the small apartment. Lucy and Letty, two 7-year-old girls identical in every way except for how they tied their hair, were sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by colored pencils and crumpled sheets of paper. The old television in the corner played cartoons at a low volume, more for companionship than actual entertainment. The two were drawing with the typical concentration of someone turning a blank piece of paper into an entire universe. Lucy, the older twin by exactly 12 minutes, had her hair in 2 high braids that swung when she moved her head. Letty preferred a simple ponytail, always a bit crooked, because she insisted on doing it herself. At that moment, Lucy was drawing a huge house with colorful windows and a garden full of flowers that seemed to explode from the page. Letty, on the other hand, was carefully detailing 3 stick figures, a larger one in the center, 2 smaller ones on each side, all holding hands. The front door opened with the characteristic creak that announced someone's arrival. Sarah entered carrying 2 grocery bags, her brown hair tied in a messy bun, her face etched with the exhaustion of someone who had woken up at 5 in the morning and still had a long night ahead. She was 28, but sometimes she seemed to carry the weight of a 40-year-old. Her eyes, however, lit up when she saw her daughters on the living room floor. "Mom!" they both shouted in unison, dropping their pencils and running to hug her legs. Sarah smiled, that tired but genuine smile she saved only for them, and ran a hand through their hair. "Hi, my loves, everything okay here? Did you eat the snack I left for you?" "We did," Lucy answered proudly, "and I helped Letty with her math homework." "You're too good, my love." Sarah placed the bags on the small table of the open-plan kitchen, separated from the living room only by a narrow counter. "And you, Letty? Did you manage to do everything all right?" Letty nodded, but her gaze was fixed on something Sarah was holding in her hand. It was a white envelope, folded in half. The girl recognized that kind of paper. It was from school. Sarah noticed her gaze and sighed. She sat on the worn-out 2-seater sofa, the only truly comfortable piece of furniture they owned, and carefully opened the envelope. The twins drew closer, curious and a little apprehensive. Notices from school were rarely good news. They usually talked about supplies they needed to buy, field trips that cost money, or parties that required costumes. "What is it, Mom?" Lucy asked, climbing onto the sofa beside her. Sarah read in silence, and the girls saw her expression change. It wasn't exactly sadness, but something close to it, a worry she tried to hide, her brow furrowing slightly. She folded the paper again and forced a smile. "It's about the school's spring festival. It's next week." Letty clapped her hands, excited. "I love the spring festival. Are we going to do the square dance again?" "You are, sweetie." Sarah ran a hand over her face as if to brush away an uncomfortable thought. "But this year is a little different. It's a special themed party. Family Day. Each child needs to bring a relative to watch the presentation." Letty's enthusiasm cooled a bit. "You're going, right, Mom?" Sarah bit her lower lip. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to promise she'd be there in the front row, clapping and taking pictures with her old phone. But the truth was more complicated than that. She worked as a waitress at the Green Village, a large restaurant in downtown Chicago that served executives and tourists. She worked long shifts from 11 in the morning to 10 at night, with a short break in the middle of the afternoon. On top of that, 3 times a week, she went straight from the restaurant to the business school she attended at night, at a public university on the South Side. It was an exhausting routine, but a necessary one. Sarah dreamed of a better future for her daughters, and she knew that education was the only possible path. 2 weeks ago, Letty had a bad stomach flu. High fever, vomiting, weakness. Sarah had missed 2 consecutive days of work to take care of her, take her to the public health clinic, and make sure the medication worked. The restaurant manager hadn't been happy. He was understanding, but he made it clear that further absences would be problematic. Sarah had worked there for 3 years. She was well liked by her colleagues, knew the menu by heart, and knew how to handle difficult customers. But she also knew that waitresses were easily replaceable. She couldn't risk losing that job. Not now, not with 2 daughters to raise alone. "Mum," Lucy's voice brought her back. "Are you going or not?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I don't know if I can make it, my love. Friday is one of the busiest days at the restaurant. If I miss work again, I could get in trouble." The silence that fell in the room was heavy. Lucy and Letty looked at each other, that kind of silent. Communication that only twins seemed to master. They didn't need to say anything to understand what the other was thinking. All the other children would have someone there. Mothers, fathers, grandparents, uncles, aunts. They would be the only ones on stage with no one in the audience. The only incomplete family. The only ones with no one to applaud for them. Sarah saw the disappointment in her daughter's eyes and felt her heart ache. "I'll try, okay? I'll talk to my boss, see if I can swap shifts with someone. But I can't promise anything." "It's okay, Mom," Lucy said, quietly. "We understand." But Sarah knew it wasn't okay. She knew her daughters well enough to tell when they were holding back resentment, swallowing their sadness. She stood up, went to the kitchen, and started putting away the groceries. Rice, beans, pasta, oil, some fruit, a package of cookies, the basics. Always the basics. As she arranged everything in the cramped cabinets, she thought about how much she wished she could give them more. Not just material things, but time. Presence. The feeling that they had a complete family. The girls went back to their drawings on the floor, but the atmosphere was different. They didn't talk, they didn't laugh. They just colored mechanically, lost in thoughts that 7-year-old children shouldn't have. That night, after Sarah left for her class, leaving the girls with dinner eaten and the door locked from the inside, Lucy and Letty stayed up past their bedtime. Lying in the twin bed they shared, staring at the cracked ceiling, they talked in whispers. "Letty, do you think Mom will be able to go?" Lucy asked. Letty took a while to answer. "I don't think so. She's really worried about work. All the other kids will have someone there. We'll be the only ones alone." "I know." Silence. Then Lucy turned on her side, facing her sister. "What if we asked someone else to go?" Letty frowned. "Who else? We don't have anyone else." It was true. Sarah was an only child, and her parents were no longer around. On their father's side, they knew nothing. Sarah never spoke of him. When they asked, she would just say he wasn't part of their lives and change the subject. Over time, the twins stopped asking. "What if we asked someone to pretend?" Lucy insisted, her voice filled with a desperate, childish hope. "Like someone we find and ask to go just for one day, just so we're not alone." Letty's eyes widened. "That's crazy, Lucy. Mum said to never talk to strangers. But we have to. Come on." Before Letty could protest further, Lucy was already crossing the street, holding her sister's hand tightly. They looked both ways, waited for the light to turn red for the cars, and crossed in the crosswalk. Letty's heart was pounding. This was crazy. But it was her sister's craziness, and she could never say no to Lucy. They reached the other side of the avenue and approached the man. He was distracted, looking at his phone screen, typing something quickly. Lucy cleared her throat. "Excuse me, sir." The man looked up, surprised. He glanced around, looking for an adult accompanying the girls. He saw no one. He crouched down slightly, bringing himself closer to their height. "Hi, are you lost?" "No, sir," Lucy replied, with a confidence that surprised even herself. "We just wanted to ask you a question." The man smiled, a gentle smile. "You can ask." Lucy took a deep breath. "Do you have any children?" The question caught him off guard. He blinked a few times, as if he needed to process what he had just heard. "No, I don't." "So are you free on Friday morning?" The man frowned. confused but still smiling. That depends. Why? Lucy looked at Letty, who gave a slight nod, giving her courage. Because we wanted to ask you a favor. A very important favor. What kind of favor? Lucy swallowed hard. There's a party at our school on Friday. It's family day. All the kids have to bring a relative to watch the presentation. But our mom can't go because she works and might lose her job. And we don't have anyone else, so we thought maybe you could go just for one day, just so we're not alone on stage. The man was completely frozen. He looked from one girl to the other, trying to figure out if this was a joke, a prank, some kind of setup. But the twins' eyes were too sincere, too desperate. He felt something tighten in his chest. You're asking me to pretend to be your father. Just for one day, Letty said for the first time, her voice almost a whisper. Just so. We're not alone. The man didn't know what to say. It was the strangest, most surreal situation he had ever experienced. Two unknown children asking him to attend a school party, pretending to be their father. It was absurd. It was inappropriate. It was completely out of the question. But there was something in those girls' eyes that stopped him from simply saying no and walking away. A deep sadness mixed with hope. A desperate courage. They weren't playing. They were truly alone. They truly needed someone. I don't think that's a good idea, he began, choosing his words carefully. You don't know me, I don't know you, this wouldn't be right. We know, Lucy said quickly, but we don't have anyone else. And you seem like a good person. You look like a dad. The man felt a lump in his throat. You look like a dad. When was the last time someone had said something like that to him? When was the last time someone had looked at him and seen something other than the successful businessman, the busy executive, the lonely man who lived in an apartment that was too big and worked far too late? What are your names? I'm Lucy, this is Letty, we're twins. Nice to meet you, Lucy and Letty, my name is Edward. The girls smiled, and it was as if the sun had come out from behind the clouds. Nice to meet you, Mr. Edward. Look, I understand your situation. I really do. But I can't just show up at your school pretending to be someone I'm not. That would cause problems, for me and for you. The girls' smiles vanished. Lucy bit her lower lip, fighting back tears. Okay, we understand. Sorry to bother you. They turned to leave. Their hands still intertwined, and Edward felt something break inside him. He saw himself at 7 years old in a public school on the outskirts of Chicago, participating in a school play where all the other kids had parents watching, except him. His mother worked as a maid and couldn't miss a day. His father had never been around. Edward remembered how alone he had felt on that stage. Invisible. Forgotten. Wait. The girls stopped and turned around. Where is your school? Santos Dumont Elementary School, Lucy said, her eyes shining with renewed hope. On Jandiah Street. And what time is the presentation? 9:30 in the morning. Edward sighed. He knew he was making a mistake. He knew this could go wrong in 1,000 different ways. But he couldn't look at those girls and just turn his back. I'll think about it, okay? I can't promise anything, but I'll think about it. It was enough. Lucy and Letty smiled again, waved, and ran off in the direction of the school. Edward stood there, holding his leather briefcase, feeling completely lost. He looked at his phone. He had 3 meetings scheduled for Friday morning. He would have to cancel all of them. Explain to his partners, come up with a plausible excuse. But as he got into the car that had finally arrived to pick him up, a black town car with a uniformed driver, all he could think about were those 2 pairs of brown eyes looking at him with hope. And a promise he hadn't made, but one he felt he had to keep. At school, Lucy and Letty arrived late for their first class. The teacher, Mrs. Sylvia, a kind elderly woman with white hair and reading glasses hanging from a chain, frowned but said nothing. She knew, about the girls' situation. She knew they lived alone with their mother. She knew they often had to fend for themselves. She turned a blind eye to the 10-minute delay and let them sit at their desks. Throughout the morning, the twins couldn't pay attention to anything. They kept looking at each other, smiling, whispering. Is he really going to come? Will he show up? Hope was dangerous, but irresistible. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, in an office on the 23rd floor of a commercial building on Michigan Avenue, Edward Almeida sat in his leather chair and stared out the panoramic window without really seeing anything. His secretary had just left after confirming the week's appointments. Edward was the majority partner of a business consulting firm responsible for dozens of employees and multi-million-dollar contracts. His schedule was always full, his time always scarce, but all he could think about were two twin girls asking him to pretend to be their father for a day. It was ridiculous, it was reckless, it was the strangest thing anyone had ever asked him. And yet for the first time in years Edward felt needed, not as a businessman, not as a consultant, not as a source of money or power, but as a person, as a presence, as someone who mattered not for what he had, but simply for being there. He picked up the intercom and dialed his secretary. Amanda, I need to cancel all my appointments for Friday morning. Something important has come up. All right, Mr. Edward, is there a problem? No, he replied, feeling an involuntary smile form. It's not a problem. It's something else. Something I need to do. He hung up the phone and looked out the window again. Chicago stretched to the horizon, a jungle of concrete and glass, full of intertwined stories and lives that crossed by chance. In a specific corner of this vastness, two 7-year-old girls were waiting for a small miracle. And Edward, for the first time in a long time, felt that maybe he could be that miracle. The week followed its natural course. Sarah worked long hours at the restaurant, studied for her college exams, slept little, and worried a lot. She tried to talk to the manager about swapping her shift on Friday, but the answer was clear. There was no one available to cover for her. If she missed it, she would be risking her job. Sarah returned home that night with a heavy heart, knowing she would have to disappoint her daughters once again. When she arrived, it was already past 11. The girls were asleep, cuddled together in the small bed they shared. Sarah stood in the bedroom doorway, watching them in the dim light from the hallway. They were so small, so brave, so used to dealing with absences. She felt tears burn in her eyes but didn't let them fall. She couldn't afford to break down, she had to be strong. For them. Always for them. Friday dawned overcast in Chicago. Edward woke up earlier than usual, showered, and put on a more understated suit than he typically wore, a light grey one with a white shirt and a discreet tie. He looked at himself in the mirror and wondered what the hell he was doing. There was still time to back out. He could still call his secretary, uncancel the meetings, and go back to his normal routine, but he didn't. He grabbed his car keys, went down to the parking garage of the luxury residential building where he lived in the Gold Coast, and drove to Lincoln Park. He parked 2 blocks from the school and walked slowly, his hands in his pockets, feeling completely out of place. Santos Dumont Elementary School was a single-story building of exposed brick, with a large playground where children ran and shouted during recess. American and Illinois state flags fluttered on poles at the entrance, and there was a green-painted iron gate. Edward stopped on the other side of the street, watching. Parents were starting to arrive, many holding hands with their children, others carrying cameras and phones ready to capture the moment. He felt like an imposter, an intruder at a celebration that didn't belong to him. Then he saw them. Lucy and Letty were walking down the sidewalk in their uniforms, backpacks on their shoulders. They were alone, as always, but this time their eyes were scanning the street, looking for someone, looking for him. When they saw him, their little faces lit up in a way Edward would never forget. It wasn't just joy, it was relief, it was gratitude. It was the feeling that someone for the first time had kept a promise made to them. Edward crossed the street and approached. The girls ran toward him but stopped a few feet away, suddenly shy. He crouched down, getting to their level. "Good morning, girls. You came," Lucy said, her voice choked with emotion. "I said I would think about it, and I thought. And I decided you deserve to have someone in the audience today." Letty had tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Edward. Thank you so much." "No need to thank me. Now tell me, what do I need to do?" Just sit in the back and watch the presentation. We're going to sing and show. Some drawings, it's quick. Edward smiled. Sounds easy enough, I can do that. They entered the school together, the girls walking beside him with pride written all over their faces. Edward noticed the curious glances from other parents, but ignored them. He followed the twins to the auditorium, a simple space with plastic chairs lined up in rows and a small stage decorated with colorful banners and balloons. He sat discreetly in the last row, trying not to draw attention. The presentation began half an hour later. Each class went up on stage, sang a typical spring festival song, showed projects made in class and received proud applause from their families. When it was Lucy and Letty's class's turn, Edward felt his heart race. The girls went on stage with 20 other children, all wearing makeshift country-style outfits. Mrs. Sylvia gave the signal, and they began to sing "Oh, Susanna" in adorable off-key voices. Edward didn't take his eyes off them. He saw how they struggled to remember the choreography, how they smiled even though they were nervous, how their eyes searched for him in the audience and lit up when they found him. And something inside him, something that had been dormant for years, woke up. A sense of belonging, of purpose, of importance that had nothing to do with money or professional success. When the song ended and the children took a bow, Edward was the first to stand up and applaud. He clapped with genuine enthusiasm and saw Lucy and Letty laugh with joy, waving discreetly at him. Other parents looked at him, some smiling, recognizing in him a proud father just like all the others there. After the presentation, the children came down from the stage and went to meet their families. Lucy and Letty ran to Edward, who received them with an awkward but warm hug. Mrs. Sylvia approached, extending her hand. "A pleasure. I'm Mrs. Sylvia. Are you the girl's father?" Edward hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then he replied, "I'm a friend of the family. Their mother couldn't make it, so I came in her place." "How kind of you. The girls are wonderful students, very polite and hard-working." "I'm sure they are." After the teacher walked away, Lucy tugged on Edward's suit jacket. "We wanted to thank you properly. Can you have lunch with us?" Edward looked at them and realized he couldn't say no. "Of course. Where do you want to go?" "There's a diner near our house that makes the best burger in the world," Letty said, her eyes shining. "Then let's go there." They left the school together, Edward walking in the middle, a girl on each side. Anyone seeing them would think they were a father and his daughters, and maybe, just for that moment, they were. The Lincoln Park Diner was on a busy corner, 3 blocks from the building where the girls lived. It was one of those traditional neighborhood spots with red formica, tables, swivel stools at the counter, and a menu handwritten on a chalkboard hanging on the wall. The smell of fried food and fresh coffee filled the air. A few regulars were having lunch at the counter, chatting with the owner, Mr. Morris, a short, portly man who knew half the neighborhood by name. Edward, Lucy, and Letty went in and sat at a table near the window. The girls already knew the place by heart, greeted Mr. Morris with familiarity, and ordered their favorite burgers without even looking at the menu. Edward ordered the same, feeling strangely comfortable in this simple environment, so different from the sophisticated restaurants he usually frequented. While they waited for their food, the girls talked excitedly about the presentation, recalling every detail, laughing at the mistakes they made in the choreography. Edward listened with genuine attention, asking questions, smiling at their stories. There was something about their childish light-heartedness that completely disarmed him. He couldn't remember the last time he had a conversation like this, without thinking about business, deadlines, or responsibilities. Just talking for the sake of talking. "Are you sure you don't have kids?" Lucy asked suddenly, tilting her head to the side. Edward blinked, surprised by the direct question. "I'm sure. Why?" "Because you're really good at it. Talking to kids. Making us feel important." The observation caught him off guard. He had never thought of himself that way. "Thank you, Lucy. That's very kind of you." Letty sipped the orange juice Mr. Morris had brought and looked at Edward with curiosity. "Do you live alone?" "I do." "And you don't get scared at night?" Edward smiled. "Sometimes, but I get used to it." "We live alone with our mom too," Letty continued, "and sometimes it gets a little lonely, but at least we have each other. You're very lucky in that. Having a sister must be great. It is, Lucy agreed. Letty is my best friend. We do everything together, share everything, even our bed. Edward felt a pang in his chest. He imagined the two girls sharing a small bed, taking care of each other, growing up too fast because life hadn't given them another choice. He remembered his own childhood, also marked by absences and hardships. His mother worked from sunup to sundown, and he spent most of his time alone in a tiny apartment on the west side of Chicago. He had learned early on how to cook, do laundry, and fend for himself, just as these girls were learning. "And your mother?" Edward asked, choosing his words carefully. "What is she like?" The twins' faces lit up. "Our mom is the best person in the world," Letty said with absolute conviction. "She works so hard, 2 jobs, and she still studies at night." "She wants to be a business manager," Lucy added. "She says when she graduates, she'll get a better job and we'll be able to go on vacation. She sounds like a very strong woman." "She is, and she takes great care of us. Even when she's tired, she always asks if we did our homework, if we ate properly, if everything's okay at school." Edward listened intently, forming a mental image of a hard-working, dedicated woman doing the impossible to give her daughters the best she could. He felt immediate respect for someone he didn't even know, and also a twinge of guilt for living in a reality so far removed from that daily struggle. The burgers arrived, huge and juicy, accompanied by crispy French fries. The girls attacked the food with a voracious appetite, talking between bites, laughing at inside jokes only they understood. Edward ate slowly, watching them, feeling something strange grow inside him. It wasn't pity, it was something deeper, a connection he couldn't explain. When they finished eating and Edward paid the bill, insisting it was his treat, Lucy looked at Letty and then at him. "We wanted to show you something. Can you come with us to our house? It's close by." Edward hesitated. Going to the girls' apartment seemed to cross a line, but they looked at him with such expectation, with such trust, that he couldn't refuse. "Of course, let's go." They walked through the neighborhood streets, passing by cheap clothing stores, bakeries, pharmacies, and newsstands. Edward observed everything with renewed attention, as if seeing this world for the first time. These were places that existed in the same city he lived in, but they belonged to a completely different reality from his own. The girls' building was humble but clean, with plants at the entrance and walls that needed a new coat of paint. They climbed the 3 flights of stairs, Edward carrying Letty's backpack that she had insisted on giving him. On the 3rd floor, Lucy opened the door with a key she wore on a chain around her neck. "Come in, Mr. Edward." He entered and found himself in a tiny but organized apartment, a living room with a sofa, an old television, and a small coffee table, an open-plan kitchen separated only by a counter, a narrow hallway leading to 2 rooms, probably a bedroom and a bathroom. Everything was simple, but there was a clear sense of care in the arrangement. Colorful cushions on the sofa, clean curtains, pictures of the girls held by magnets on the refrigerator. The twins dropped their backpacks and ran to the bedroom. They returned carrying a shoebox filled with drawings. They sat on the living room floor and began to show their work to Edward, who sat with them, admiring each scribble, each colorful figure. "I made this one when we went to the zoo with the school," Letty explained, showing a drawing of a disproportionate giraffe with an even longer neck than usual. "It looks great. Do you like animals?" "I love them. When I grow up, I want to be a veterinarian." Edward smiled. "That's a beautiful profession." Lucy showed the next drawing, a huge house with a flowery garden and 3 people in front. "This is the house I want to have one day, with a garden for us to plant flowers and a room just for us, a really big one, with 2 beds. Edward looked at the drawing for a long moment. "You'll get it, I'm sure. You two are very smart. You'll achieve anything you want." They spent almost an hour there, sitting on the floor, talking, laughing, sharing stories. Edward told them about his difficult childhood, about how he also grew up without a father, about how his mother worked tirelessly to give him an education. The girls listened attentively, asking questions, drawing parallels between their experiences and his. There was a natural harmony, a mutual understanding that went beyond words. When Edward finally looked at his watch, it was already past 3 in the afternoon. He had to go. He had commitments he could no longer postpone. He stood up, adjusted his suit, and smiled at the girls. "I have to get back to work, but this has been a wonderful morning. Thank you for inviting me." "Thank you for coming to our presentation," Lucy said, standing up as well. "You have no idea how much that meant to us." "It meant a lot to me, too." Letty bit her lip, as if she wanted to say something but didn't know how. Then she gathered her courage. "Are we going to see you again?" Edward looked into those hopeful eyes and felt his heart ache. He knew the most sensible answer would be no, that this had been a one-time favor, a one-day kindness, and that prolonging this contact could create dangerous expectations. But the words that came out of his mouth were different. "Of course, if you want, I can come visit you from time to time." The smiles he received in response were worth any risk. Edward left the building feeling different, lighter, more alive. He got into his car and sat there for a few minutes, just thinking. Those girls had stirred something deep inside him. They had awakened a part of him he didn't even know existed, a desire to care, to protect, to be present. In the following days, Edward couldn't stop thinking about Lucy and Letty. During important meetings, he would find himself wondering if they were okay, if they had eaten lunch properly, if they were doing their homework. At night, alone in his penthouse apartment with a view of the city, he felt the silence weigh on him in a way it never had before. The following Tuesday, he made a decision. He went to a large department store and bought school supplies, new notebooks, complete pencil cases with high-quality colored pencils, pens, erasers, sharpeners. He also bought 2 new backpacks, clothes, shoes, sneakers. He spent more than he should have, but he didn't care. He wanted to see the girls' faces light up again. When he arrived at the building in the late afternoon, he buzzed the apartment. Lucy answered, and her voice went high with surprise. "Mr. Edward, is that you?" "It's me. Can I come up?" "Of course, we're here." He went up carrying heavy bags, his heart beating faster than usual. When he reached the 3rd floor, the door was already open, and the girls were waiting with huge smiles. "What did you bring?" Letty asked, curious. "Some gifts. May I come in?" They went into the living room, and Edward placed the bags on the sofa. The girls opened everything with enthusiasm, exclaiming at each new item. The notebooks were colorful with shiny covers. The colored pencils came in a varnished wooden box. The backpacks were pink and lilac, exactly their favorite colors, as if Edward had guessed. "Everything is beautiful, Mr. Edward," Lucy said, hugging one of the notebooks to her chest. "But it must have cost a lot of money." "Don't worry about that. I wanted to give them to you." "But why?" Letty asked, genuinely confused. "We barely know you." Edward sat on the sofa and looked at them sincerely. "Because you reminded me how important it is to have someone who cares, and I'd like to be that person for you if you'll let me." The girls were silent for a moment, processing his words. Then Lucy climbed onto the sofa next to him and rested her head on his shoulder. "We'd like that very much." They were like that, the 3 of them sitting on the sofa surrounded by gifts, when the front door opened. Sarah walked in carrying her work bag, her face tired, her hair loose on her shoulders. She stopped in the middle of the room, frozen, looking at the scene before her. Edward stood up, immediately, feeling like a court intruder. The girls ran to their mother, talking all at once, explaining about the school party, about how Edward had come, about the lunch and now the gifts. Sarah listened in silence, her face unreadable. But her eyes were fixed on Edward, and there was something in her gaze he couldn't interpret. It wasn't anger. It wasn't exactly surprise. It was something else, something deeper, something that looked like shock. "Girls, go to your room," Sarah said, her voice controlled but firm. "I need to speak with this gentleman alone." "But, Mom..." Lucy started to protest. "Room, now." The twins obeyed reluctantly, taking some of the bags with them. The bedroom door closed, and Sarah and Edward were left alone in the living room. The silence was heavy, thick with tension. Sarah crossed her arms, keeping her distance. "Who are you?" "My name is Edward Almeida. Your daughters approached me last week and asked me to go to their school presentation because you couldn't make it." "They did what?" Sarah's voice rose an octave. They approached a stranger on the street. It was a safe situation. They were worried about being alone at the presentation. "And you just agreed?" Sarah took a step forward, her eyes flashing with indignation and something else. "You didn't find it strange, inappropriate, two unknown children asking for that?" "I did," Edward admitted. "But I also thought they needed someone, and I was available." Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Available. How convenient. And now, you show up here with expensive gifts, winning my daughter's trust, and I'm just supposed to accept it." "I'm not asking you to accept it, I just wanted to help." "Help?" Sarah shook her head, her hands trembling slightly. "You don't understand. You can't just walk into their lives like this and then disappear. They'll get attached, they'll build expectations. And when you get tired of this Good Samaritan game and vanish, who's going to deal with their pain?" "Me." Edward remained silent, absorbing the justified fury of this woman. She was right. He hadn't thought about the long-term consequences. He had acted on impulse, on emotion, without considering the impact his temporary presence could have. "I don't plan on disappearing," he said quietly. "They all say that." Sarah turned her face away, quickly wiping what might have been a tear. "Please leave and don't come back. My daughters have enough absences in their lives. They don't need another one." "Sarah," Edward began, but she cut him off. "It's Ms. to you, not Sarah, and please, respect my request. Go." There was nothing to do but obey. Edward picked up his briefcase, which he had left leaning against the wall, and walked to the door. Before leaving, he turned one last time. "I'm sorry if I caused any trouble. That wasn't my intention." Sarah didn't answer. She just stood there, her back to him, her shoulders tense. Edward left, closed the door behind him, and walked down the stairs with a heavy chest. He felt confused, frustrated, and surprisingly sad. Inside the apartment, Sarah leaned against the closed door and finally let the tears fall. Seeing that face again after so long was like being hit by a train. Edward Almeida. She remembered him. Of course, she remembered. How could she forget? 8 years ago, she was working as a waitress at an elegant corporate event at a 5-star hotel. It was a temporary, well-paying job she had taken to save money for overdue bills. She had served canapés and champagne to well-dressed executives, feeling invisible in the sophisticated crowd, until her eyes met those of a tall man in an impeccable suit who looked at her, really looked at her, not like the others, who saw right through her, but as if she existed, as if she mattered. At the end of the night, tired and lonely in their own ways, they talked. He told her about the pressure of his job, about the loneliness of living in a world of appearances. She talked about her dreams of studying, of making a better life for herself. There was a connection, something real, however brief. One night, it was just one night, and then they each went their separate ways. Sarah never expected to see him again. When she found out she was pregnant weeks later, she didn't even consider looking for him. He was from another world. He would never remember one waitress among so many, and she was too proud to show up demanding something from someone who barely knew her. She had raised her daughters alone, working 2 jobs, studying, struggling. She never regretted it. Lucy and Letty were everything to her. But now, suddenly, there he was, in her living room, giving gifts to the daughters that were his without him even knowing. Sarah wiped her tears and went to the girls' room. They were sitting on the bed, surrounded by the gifts, their faces worried. "Did we do something wrong, Mom?" Lucy asked, her voice small. Sarah sat between them and hugged them. "No, my love, you didn't do anything wrong. I just need you to understand that we can't accept things from strangers." "But Mr. Edward isn't a stranger," Letty protested. "He's nice, he cares about us." "I know it seems that way, but you barely know him, and he has his own life. We can't expect him to stick around. But he said he would come back." Sarah sighed, holding her daughters close. "Sometimes people say things they can't follow through on, and it's not their fault. It's just life being complicated." The girls fell silent, but Sarah could feel their sadness. She hated being the one to extinguish the hope in her daughters' eyes, but it was her job to protect them. even if it meant hurting them a little now, to prevent a greater pain later. Meanwhile, Edward drove through the streets of Chicago with no destination. He was confused, shaken, unable to process the whirlwind of emotions. That woman, Sarah, had looked at him in a strange way, as if she knew him. But he was sure he had never seen her before. Or had he? He pulled the car over on a quiet street and closed his eyes, trying to remember. There was something familiar about that face, those eyes, but the memory was vague, distant. So many parties, so many events, so many faces that passed by without leaving a mark. He shook his head, pushing the thoughts away. It didn't matter. She had asked him not to come back, and he had to respect that. As much as it hurt, as much as the girls had touched his heart in a way he couldn't explain, he had to take a step back. But in the following days, Edward's resolve wavered. He thought constantly of Lucy and Letty. He imagined them coming home from school alone, doing their homework, taking care of each other. He missed their conversations, their smiles, the lightness they brought to his overly ordered life. A week later, he made another decision. He went back to the store and bought new school uniforms, brand-name sneakers, socks, more school supplies. He knew he was disrespecting Sarah's request. He knew he was risking creating a bigger problem, but he couldn't just disappear from those girls' lives, not after seeing the joy in their eyes. He returned to the building on a Thursday afternoon. He buzzed the intercom, prepared for Sarah's resistance, but it was Lucy's voice that answered. "Mr. Edward, Mom's not here, but we are. You can come up." Edward hesitated. Maybe it was better to come back another day when Sarah was present. But the building door was already unlocked, and he heard the girls' hurried footsteps coming down the stairs to meet him. They went up to the apartment together. The twins were radiant, talking all at once about their week, about their grades on tests, about a fight they witnessed at recess. Edward listened to everything, sat with them on the living room floor, and showed them the gifts he had brought. The uniforms were the right size, the sneakers comfortable and stylish. The girls tried everything on, parading around the living room laughing. Edward took pictures with his phone, capturing those moments of pure joy. They spent the afternoon together. Edward helped with their homework, explained math problems, listened to Letty read a text aloud to practice. They prepared a simple snack, cheese sandwiches with juice boxes, and ate while talking about everything and nothing. When the sun began to set and Sarah could arrive at any moment, Edward prepared to leave. But first, the girls hugged him tightly, thanking him for the gifts and the company. "We like you a lot, Mr. Edward," Letty said, squeezing him tightly. "I like you a lot too," he replied, and realized it was absolutely true. He went down the stairs feeling complete in a way he hadn't felt in years, but as he left the building, he nearly bumped into Sarah, who was rushing home, late from work. She stopped when she saw him, her face changing from surprise to indignation. "I asked you not to come back." "I know, but I couldn't stay away." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, and Edward saw something break in her expression, a barrier giving way. "Come up," she said finally. "We need to have a real talk." They went back to the apartment together. The girls who were waiting for their mother were confused to see them walk in together. Sarah sent them to their room once more, and they obeyed without protest. When they were alone, Sarah sat on the sofa and buried her face in her hands. Edward remained standing, waiting, sensing that something important was about to happen. When Sarah lifted her face again, her eyes were wet. "I need to tell you something, Edward. Something that changed my life 8 years ago, and that's going to change yours now." The silence in the room was dense, thick with anticipation. Edward remained standing, his heart racing without knowing exactly why. Sarah took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she searched for the right words. Silent tears streamed down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. She just looked at him with a mixture of fear, anger, and something that seemed like resignation. "Do you remember a corporate event 8 years ago?" Sarah began, her voice trembling. "At the Palmer House Hilton in downtown Chicago. It was a launch party for an investment fund. You were there with other executives." Edward frowned, trying to access the memory. He had attended so many similar events over the years. Corporate parties blurred into one another, faces and names lost to time. But then, slowly, something began to surface. A specific night, an elegant ballroom, an unexpected conversation. "I remember," he said slowly. "It was a boring event. A lot of people talking about numbers and the market. I was tired, wanting to leave." "You talked to one of the waitresses," Sarah continued, and Edward felt a chill run down his spine. A young waitress with brown hair who was serving champagne and smiling even though she was visibly exhausted. The memory sharpened. He remembered now. He remembered looking at her and feeling an instant connection, something rare for someone so used to superficial interactions. He remembered waiting for her at the end of the event, talking in the empty service area, laughing at silly jokes while she took off the high heels that were hurting her feet. "It was you," Edward whispered, more to himself than to her. "It was me." Sarah finally wiped her tears with the back of her hand. And that night had consequences you never knew about. Edward felt the floor disappear from under him. He didn't need her to say it. He already knew. He glanced toward the room where the girls were, then back at Sarah. His face must have been pale because she nodded, confirming what he had already deduced. "They're my daughters." It wasn't a question. It was a whispered statement, a verbalized thought. Edward sat down heavily on the sofa, his legs weak. He put his hands on his head, trying to process this information that rewrote his entire reality. "Why did you never tell me?" The words came out harsher than he intended. Sarah crossed her arms defensively. "And how would I have done that, Edward? You gave me your first name and nothing else. I didn't have a last name, a phone number, anything. And even if I did, what would I have said? Hi, remember me? That waitress you spent one night with? I'm pregnant. I need help." "I would have helped," Edward retorted, raising his face to meet hers. "Do you think I would have just abandoned you, abandoned my daughters? I didn't think anything. I didn't know you." Sarah stood up, pacing the small living room. "You were a rich executive. I was a waitress who could barely pay her rent. We came from completely different worlds. I wasn't going to chase you down asking for handouts or recognition. I decided to raise my daughters alone, with dignity, and that's exactly what I did." "Our daughters," Edward corrected, his voice firm. "They're our daughters, Sarah, and I had a right to know." Sarah stopped pacing and faced him. "A right? You want to talk about rights? Where were you when I spent 9 months with morning sickness, working until the last day before giving birth because I couldn't afford to stop? Where were you when they were born premature and I spent weeks in the hospital praying they would survive? Where were you on the nights they cried with a fever and I didn't have money for medicine? Where were you for every birthday, every Mother's Day, every difficult moment of these 7 years?" The words were like punches, each one hitting Edward squarely. He had no answer, no defense. Everything Sarah said was true. He hadn't been there, not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't know. But did that change anything? Did it make his absence any less painful? "I didn't know," he said finally, his voice broken. "I swear on everything I didn't know. If I had known, I would have been there. For every moment. For all of them." Sarah sat down again, her body seeming to deflate with exhaustion and emotion. "I believe you. That's not the point. The point is now you know, and I need to know what you plan to do with this information." Edward fell silent, thinking. What did he plan to do? A few hours ago, he was just a lonely man who had grown fond of 2 little girls by chance. Now he was a father to 2 daughters who had grown up without him, who didn't know he existed, who called him Mr. Edward and smiled when he showed up, because they thought it was the kindness of a stranger. "I want to be their father," he said finally, and felt the absolute truth of those words. "I want to be present. I want to really get to know them. I want to make up for all the lost time." "You can't just make up for 7 years in a few months, Edward." Sarah shook her head. "And they don't know who you are. To them, you're just a nice man who suddenly appeared. Telling them the truth now will turn their world upside down. Then we won't tell them yet." Edward leaned forward, seeking her eyes. "Let me be present first. Let me build a real relationship with them. And when the time is right, we'll tell them together. Sarah looked at him for a long time, sizing him up. Finally, she sighed. You need to understand something. I have protected these girls their entire lives, alone, and I will continue to protect them. If at any moment I feel that you are going to hurt them, that you're going to disappear, that you'll make promises you can't keep, I will push you out of their lives without a second thought. I don't care if you're the biological father. What matters is who is present. And so far, that person has always been me. Edward nodded, respecting the protective fierceness of this woman. I understand, and I promise I will be present. I won't disappear. I won't make empty promises. This is too important. They are too important. Sarah studied his face, looking for signs of a lie or doubt. She found none. Only determination and sincerity. All right, she said finally. You can be a part of their lives, but slowly and carefully. It was as if a door had opened. Edward felt relief, gratitude, and an enormous sense of responsibility. He wasn't going to screw up this chance. He wasn't going to disappoint those girls, or Sarah. In the following days, Edward completely reorganized his life. He delegated responsibilities at work, cancelled less important commitments, and adjusted his schedule to have more free time. He began to visit the apartment regularly, always bringing something useful, never just frivolous gifts, school supplies, weather-appropriate clothing, children's books, fresh fruit. The visits became part of the routine. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, Edward would show up in the late afternoon, help the girls with their homework, cook dinner with them, and talk as they ate. Sarah observed everything with initial caution, but gradually she began to relax. She saw how patient he was explaining math to Lucy, how attentively he listened to Letty's made-up stories, how genuinely he cared about the small details of their daily lives. One Saturday, Edward took them to Lincoln Park Zoo. It was the first time the girls had been on the carousel, and their joy was contagious. Sarah went along, sitting on a horse next to Edward while the twins rode theirs, laughing as they went up and down. They've never been here before, Sarah commented, watching her daughters. I always wanted to bring them, but there was never enough time or money for a snack afterward. We can come as often as they want, Edward said, and the snack is on me. Sarah looked at him. You don't have to pay for everything, you know. It's not about the money. I know, but let me help. Let me be a part of this. She didn't answer, but her silence was different now, less hostile, more like acceptance. As the weeks went by, Edward became a constant presence. He picked up the girls from school when Sarah couldn't, took them to swimming lessons that he paid for as an early birthday present, and helped with their school projects. He met their teachers, their classmates, and learned their entire routine. And the more time he spent with Lucy and Letty, the more he fell in love with them. It wasn't an instant feeling, but something that grew with every conversation, every shared smile, every moment of complicity. They were smart, funny, resilient. They had distinct personalities despite being identical twins. Lucy was more practical, organized, responsible. Letty was a dreamer, creative, sensitive, and both had huge hearts. One evening after the girls had gone to sleep, Edward and Sarah talked in the living room. He noticed how particularly tired she looked, with dark circles under her eyes and slumped shoulders. Are you okay? Edward asked. Sarah gave a faint smile. Just tired. Work, college, the house, the usual routine. Edward hesitated before asking the next question. Can I ask how much you make at the restaurant? Sarah frowned. Why? Just curious. I want to better understand your situation. She sighed. Minimum wage plus tips. It comes out to about $2,500 a month when business is good. It barely covers rent, bills, and food. And college? It's a public university. But the materials, transportation, all of that costs money. Sometimes I have to choose between buying a book or new shoes for the girls. Edward felt his chest tighten. You don't have to choose. Let me help financially. Sarah stiffened. I don't want your money, Edward. It's not a handout. They're my daughters. I have a responsibility to them. I managed for 7 years without your help. I can continue. But you don't have to. Edward leaned forward. "Sarah, I have resources. Far more than I need. Let me make things easier for you. For them, please." Sarah remained silent, pride warring with pragmatism. Finally, she gave a slight nod. "You can help with the girls' expenses, clothes, school, health, but I'll keep paying for the rest. I'm still responsible for myself." Deal. From that day on, Edward began to deposit a monthly sum into Sarah's account, specifically for the girls. She used the money wisely, buying what they truly needed, saving a portion for emergencies. Life became a little easier, a little less suffocating. 2 months after their reunion on a rainy Sunday, Edward arrived at the apartment with a different proposal. The girls were drawing at the kitchen table, and Sarah was preparing lunch. He waited for the right moment and called Sarah over to talk. "I need to talk to you about something." Sarah turned off the stove and faced him. "Go ahead." "I want to legally acknowledge the girls, officially. Give them my last name. Recognize them legally as my daughters." Sarah was frozen. It was a huge step, irreversible. It meant making his paternity public, creating legal ties, changing documents. But it also meant security, rights, protection. "And them?" Sarah asked. "How do you plan to explain this to them?" Edward took a deep breath. "I think it's time to tell them the truth." Sarah sat down heavily in a chair. "They'll be confused, maybe upset. They'll wonder why we didn't tell them sooner. They will, but they deserve to know, and the longer we wait, the harder it will be." Sarah looked toward her daughters, who were drawing, oblivious to the serious conversation happening just a few feet away. "All right," she said finally. "We'll tell them. But together. And in the right way." That evening, after dinner, Edward and Sarah called the girls to sit on the sofa. They obeyed, curious and a little apprehensive. Whenever the adults got serious like this, it usually meant important news. "Girls," Sarah began, holding both their hands, "we need to tell you something. Something very important about Mr. Edward." Lucy and Letty looked at Edward, who smiled encouragingly. "Is he sick?" Letty asked, worried. "No, sweetie, nothing like that." Sarah took a deep breath. "Remember how you always asked about your father, and I always said he wasn't around?" The girls nodded, attentive. "Well," Sarah looked at Edward, who nodded encouragingly. "Your father is here. He always has been. We just didn't know it. He didn't know you existed. And when you asked him to come to the school party, it was as if fate brought you together again." There was a confused silence. Lucy frowned. "We don't understand, Mom." Edward crouched down, getting to the girl's eye level. "What your mom is trying to say is that I'm your father, your biological father. Your mom and I met a long time ago before you were born, but I didn't know about you. When I met your mom again here, we found out the truth." Letty's eyes widened. "You're our dad? Our real dad?" "I am." The girls looked at each other, processing. Then Lucy turned to Sarah. "Did you know this whole time? I knew who your father was, but he didn't know about you, and I didn't know how to find him to tell him." "And now?" Letty asked, her voice small. "What happens now?" "Now," Edward said softly, "if you want, I'd like to be your real dad. Not just by blood, but in presence. To be with you, take care of you, and be a part of your lives forever." Lucy looked at him with those eyes that were too intelligent for her age. "And what if we don't want that?" Edward felt a pang in his chest but kept his voice steady. "Then I'll respect that. But I hope you'll give me a chance. I promise to do everything right. I promise I'll never disappear again." There was a long moment of silence. Then Letty got up from the sofa and hugged Edward. Lucy hesitated for a second before doing the same, and there, in the small living room of a modest apartment in Lincoln Park, a family was truly formed. In the following days, Edward arranged all the necessary paperwork for the acknowledgement of paternity. He went with Sarah and the girls to the county clerk's office, signed papers, and did DNA tests to formalize everything legally. When the new documents arrived, Lucy Almeida Johnson and Letty Almeida Johnson, The girls were fascinated to see their full names written officially. "We have a dad's last name now," Letty said, tracing the letters with her finger. "You do," Edward confirmed, feeling immense pride. With the official recognition came formal responsibility. Edward updated his will, included the girls as beneficiaries of his life insurance, and opened savings accounts for their future education. Sarah watched it all with a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. It was comforting to know her daughters would have financial security. But it was also frightening how everything had changed so quickly. A few weeks later, Edward made a proposal that took Sarah completely by surprise. They were talking in the kitchen while the girls watched television in the living room. "I bought a house," he said bluntly. Sarah stopped drying the dish she was washing. "What?" "A house. In Oak Park, not too far from here. 3 bedrooms, a yard, a garage. It's a quiet, safe neighborhood. The girls will be able to play outside." "Edward, I can't afford rent on a house like that. It's not for rent, it's ours. Mine and the girls. And yours too, if you want to live there." Sarah placed the dish in the sink, turning to face him. "You can't just buy a house and expect us to move in like that." "Why not?" Edward asked, genuinely not understanding the resistance. "You live in a tiny apartment. The girls share a bed. You deserve more space. They deserve their own rooms, a place to study, to play." "It's not about deserving, it's about independence. I've always managed on my own. I don't need you to save me. It's not about saving you, it's about giving our daughters the best we can offer, together." Sarah turned her face away, fighting her emotions. She knew Edward was right. She knew the house would be better for the girls, but accepting it felt like a complete surrender, an admission that she couldn't do it alone, a loss of the control she had always maintained with so much effort. "At least come see the house before you decide," Edward pleaded. "If you don't like it, we'll forget about it." Sarah eventually agreed. The following Saturday, they all went together to see the property. It was a charming single-story house with a yellow facade and white windows, surrounded by a yard with green grass and a few fruit trees. Inside it was spacious and bright, with a large living room, a modern kitchen, 3 bedrooms with built-in closets and 2 full bathrooms. The girls ran through the rooms, exclaiming at each discovery, already choosing which room would be theirs. "There's even an apple tree in the backyard," Letty shouted from the yard. "We can make apple pie." Sarah walked slowly through the house, touching the walls, imagining what it would be like to live there, to have space to breathe, privacy, a truly comfortable place for her daughters to grow up. It was too tempting to refuse. "All right," she said finally, finding Edward in the kitchen. "We accept, but on one condition, which is, I pay for a share, not rent because I know you won't accept that, but the utility bills, groceries, day-to-day things. I need to contribute. I need to feel like I still have control over some things." Edward thought for a moment. "Deal. You handle the daily expenses. I'll handle the rest." The move happened 2 weeks later. Edward hired a company that packed everything, transported the furniture, and arranged it in the new house. Sarah brought few things from the old apartment. Most of the furniture was too old, too broken. Edward had already furnished the house with new, comfortable things, but let Sarah choose the curtains, rugs, and decorative details. She needed to feel that this space was hers too. The girls adapted quickly. For the first time in their lives, each had her own bed, her own desk, her own closet. Lucy decorated her room with animal posters and a bookshelf full of books. Letty covered her walls with her drawings and hung lilac curtains she had picked out herself. Edward didn't live in the house. He kept his apartment on the near north side but visited daily. Sometimes he stayed for dinner. Other times he just dropped by to see how they were, help with something, or chat. Sarah appreciated this arrangement. They weren't a couple. They didn't pretend to be a traditional family, but they were a team, working together for the good of the girls. The routine found a new balance. Sarah continued working at the restaurant and studying, but now with less financial pressure. The bills were paid on time. The girls had what they needed. She even managed to reduce her hours at work, spending more time at home. Edward, for his part, discovered a version of himself he didn't know. The cold executive focused only on business gave way to a man who attended school meetings, took his daughters to the dentist, and helped build science fair models. His partners noticed the change, commenting that he seemed lighter, more human. And he was. For the first time in decades, he felt his life had a purpose beyond professional success. 3 months after the move to the new house, the girls' school organized a science fair. Each student had to present a project, and Lucy and Letty chose to do one on the water cycle. Edward spent weeks helping them build an elaborate model with papier-mâché mountains, blue paint rivers, and an irrigation system that actually worked. On the day of the fair, Edward and Sarah went together. They walked through the school hallways, looking at other children's projects, until they reached Lucy and Letty's table. The girls were radiant, wearing white lab coats that Sarah had sewn, explaining their project to passers-by with contagious enthusiasm. When it was their turn to present to the judges, Letty talked about evaporation, Lucy explained condensation, and together they demonstrated how precipitation worked on the model. The judges asked questions, the girls answered confidently, and in the end they received praise for their well-done work. After the presentation, when the judges had moved on, Lucy looked at Edward and Sarah standing side by side and smiled. "We couldn't have done it without our dad's help," she said loudly, so other children could hear. "He helped us with everything." Edward felt his eyes sting. It was the first time they had called him Dad in public, without hesitation, without shame, with pride. Letty added, looking at Sarah, "And Mum helped us study all the content. We have the best family." Sarah and Edward exchanged a look. It wasn't a conventional family, they weren't husband and wife, they didn't live under the same roof. But they were a family, united by bonds that went beyond blood, bonds of choice, of presence, of love, built day by day. At the end of the fair, as they were walking to the parking lot, Lucy tugged on Edward's hand. "Dad, can I ask you a question?" "Of course, sweetie. You can ask anything." "Why don't you and Mom get together, like married?" Edward looked at Sarah, who also seemed curious about the answer. He chose his words carefully. "Because your dad and your mum like and respect each other very much. But not all people who like each other need to be boyfriend and girlfriend or married. The important thing is that we work together, take care of you together, and want the best for each other. That's also a form of family." Lucy seemed satisfied with the answer. "Okay then, as long as you stay friends." "We always will be," Sarah assured her, and Edward nodded in agreement. The months turned into seasons. Summer arrived and Edward took the girls to the beach for the first time. He rented a house on Lake Michigan for a week, and Sarah managed to get time off work to go with them. They were days of sun, sand, laughter, and discovery. The girls learned to swim in the waves, built elaborate sandcastles, and collected seashells that they kept in glass jars. One evening, while the girls were sleeping, exhausted after a full day at the beach, Edward and Sarah sat on the house's porch, listening to the sound of the waves in the distance. "Thank you," Sarah said suddenly. Edward looked at her, surprised. "For what?" "For everything, for staying, for choosing to be present. Many men would have run from the responsibility. You embraced it." "There was no way not to embrace it. They're incredible. And a large part of that is thanks to you. You raised them alone, with dignity, with love. I'm just trying to catch up to what you've already built." Sarah smiled, a genuine and rare smile. "We make a good team. We do." They sat in a comfortable, companionable silence for a while. There was no romantic tension between them. That night 8 years ago had been a fleeting connection, important for the consequences it produced, but not something destined to blossom into romance. And that was okay. They were partners in a mission greater than any romantic relationship. They were parents. The school year ended with Lucy and Letty among the top students in their class. On the day of the report card distribution, Edward and Sarah went together, sat side by side in the auditorium, and watched the girls receive certificates of merit. Other families congratulated them. Teachers praised their involvement in the girls' education. They were recognized as a unit, a family that worked. That night back home, while they celebrated with a cake Sarah had made, Letty raised her glass of juice for a toast. "To the best year of our lives." Everyone clinked their glasses, agreeing. It had indeed been a transformative year, a year of discoveries, of reconnections, of a family being built. But as they celebrated, Edward looked at his daughters and felt a deep gratitude. Gratitude for the chance that had brought them back into his life. Gratitude for the courage of two 7-year-old girls who had approached a stranger on the street asking for a presence. Gratitude for Sarah, having allowed him to be a part of it all. Later, after the girls had gone to sleep, Edward said his goodbyes at the door. Sarah walked him to the garden gate. "You know you don't have to leave every night, right?" Sarah said. "There's a spare room in the house. You could stay whenever you want." Edward considered the offer. It was tempting, but he also knew it was important to maintain boundaries, to keep separate spaces. "Thank you, but I think it's good the way it is. This way we keep things clear. I visit, I participate, but I don't invade your space." Sarah nodded, understanding. "You're a good man, Edward. The girls are lucky. I'm the lucky one. To have found you all. To have this second chance." Edward drove away that night, thinking about how strange life was. Months ago, he was a lonely man living an empty routine. Now he had 2 daughters who loved him, a co-parenting partner who respected him, and a purpose that went beyond numbers and contracts. He had a family. Not in the traditional way he had always imagined, but in a way that was even more special. A chosen family. A built family. A real family. And as Chicago slept outside his car windows, Edward smiled. The future was full of possibilities. First communions, high school graduation, college acceptances, maybe weddings. He would be there for all of it. He wouldn't miss another moment. That was his promise to Lucy, to Letty, to himself. The following weeks brought a new, comfortable routine. Edward started sleeping over at the house once a week, usually on Fridays, when he would stay late helping the girls with projects or just talking. On Saturday mornings he would make pancakes for breakfast, a recipe he had perfected over the months. The girls would wake up to the smell, run down to the kitchen, and they would all eat together at the large table Edward had bought especially for those moments. Sarah watched these scenes with a mix of joy and melancholy. Joy at seeing her daughters happy, complete, with a present father figure. Melancholy for thinking of all the years that could have been like this if circumstances had been different. But she had learned not to live with regrets. The past couldn't be changed. The present was what mattered. One Saturday morning, while they were eating pancakes with chocolate syrup, Letty made an announcement. "We have an important presentation at school next week." "What kind of presentation?" Edward asked, pouring more juice. "It's Family Day again, but this year is different. The teacher asked each kid to talk about their family, to tell what it's like, what they do together." Lucy added, licking chocolate from her fingers. "And we thought we'd talk about how our family changed, about how it was before and how it is now." Sarah and Edward exchanged a look. "You want to talk about that?" Sarah asked cautiously. "About everything that happened?" "We do," Lucy confirmed, "because our story is cool, it's different. We don't have a normal family, but we have a real family." Edward felt his heart warm. "And what are you going to say?" Letty thought for a moment. "We're going to say that we used to live just with our mom, and it was hard, but we were happy. And then we found our dad by accident, like a miracle. And now we have both of them, even though they don't live together. And it's even better because everyone respects and likes each other." "That sounds perfect," Edward said, his voice thick with emotion. On the day of the presentation, Edward and Sarah sat together in the audience, nervous and proud. When it was Lucy and Letty's turn, the two went on stage, holding hands, and began to speak. They told about their life with their hard-working mother, about the day they approached a stranger on the street, about discovering that stranger was their father. They spoke with sincerity, without hiding the difficulties, but emphasizing the love that united them all. "Our family isn't perfect," Lucy said, looking at the audience, "but it's ours. And we love every piece of it." When they finished, the audience applauded enthusiastically. Other children had spoken of traditional families, married parents, grandparents living nearby. But Lucy and Letty's story had touched them in a different way. It was real, it was honest, it was full of resilience. After the presentation, on their way out of the school, several mothers approached Sarah and Edward, praising the girls' courage and the way they were handling co-parenting. One divorced mother commented that she was going to try to improve her relationship with her ex-husband, inspired by the example she had seen. A single father said he felt less alone, knowing that other families were also different from the standard. Edward and Sarah listened with humility. They didn't see themselves as role models, just as people trying to do their best with the situation they had. But if their story could help someone, if it could show that families come in all shapes and sizes, then it was worth sharing. That night, at home, after the girls had gone to sleep, Edward and Sarah talked in the living room. "Have you thought about the future?" Sarah asked. "About what will happen when they grow up?" "I think about it all the time," Edward admitted. "I want to be there for everything. First crush, first heartbreak, career choices, marriage if they want it, everything. And what if they want to live with you at some point? If they decide they want to stay at your apartment?" The question caught Edward by surprise. He had never thought about that. Would it hurt Sarah? Would it be fair? "I don't know," he answered honestly. "I guess the four of us would have to talk together and decide what makes the most sense. But it would never be a competition. It would never be about choosing between you and me." Sarah nodded, looking relieved. "They love you, you know. They really do. Not just because you buy them things or take them on fun outings, but because you're present, because you care. I love them too, more than I ever thought it was possible to love someone." They were silent for a moment. Then Sarah spoke again, her voice lower. "Sometimes I feel guilty." "Why?" "For not telling you from the beginning, for depriving you of 7 years with them, and them of 7 years with you." Edward shook his head. "Don't blame yourself. You did what you thought was right at the time, and you raised 2 incredible girls. That's what matters. Thank you for saying that." "It's true. And look, Sarah," he leaned forward, meeting her eyes, "we can't change the past, but we can build the future together as a team, and that's exactly what we're doing." Sarah smiled, and for the first time since they had reconnected, Edward saw true peace on her face. Peace and acceptance. They were okay. The girls were okay. The strange, unconventional family they had built was working. And as the night deepened over Chicago, in the yellow house with the apple tree in the yard, 4 people slept peacefully. A family united not by social conventions, but by stronger bonds. Bonds of choice, bonds of presence, bonds of true and unconditional love. 3 years had passed since that rainy day when Sarah had revealed the truth to Edward. Lucy and Letty were now 10 years old, in the 5th grade, and had grown not just in height, but in confidence and maturity. The yellow house in Oak Park had become the center of a rich family, life full of special moments. Sarah had finally graduated with her business degree in an emotional ceremony where Edward, Lucy, and Letty occupied the front row, giving a standing ovation as she walked across the stage to receive her diploma. The girls held a handmade sign that read, "Congratulations, Mom, you did it," decorated with colorful flowers and hearts. Sarah cried when she saw them, remembering all the nights she had studied late, all the times she had doubted if she could balance work, motherhood, and college. But she had done it, and her daughters were there to witness it. With her degree in hand, Sarah had secured a better job at a logistics company, working as an administrative assistant with a salary significantly higher than what she earned as a waitress. She had left the Green Village with a mix of relief and nostalgia. That place represented difficult years, but also her strength and resilience. Her former colleagues threw her a farewell party, and Sarah left with the certainty that she deserved this new opportunity. Edward continued as a partner at the consulting firm, but had found a better balance between work and family. He had delegated more responsibilities, cut back on unnecessary travel, and prioritized being present for important moments. When Lucy won first place in a school math competition, Edward was there. When Letty had her first school play, playing a tree with such enthusiasm that she drew laughter and applause from the audience, Edward was in the front row filming everything. The dynamic between Sarah and Edward had solidified into a respectful and efficient partnership. They talked daily about the girls, shared important decisions, and attended school meetings and doctor's appointments together. Occasionally, people would ask if they were married, and they would calmly reply that they weren't, but they were partners in raising their daughters. Some found it strange, others admired the arrangement, but other people's opinions mattered less and less. What mattered was that it worked. One Saturday morning, Edward arrived for the traditional pancake breakfast and found the girls in the living room, surrounded by papers and colored markers. They were making posters for a science project on environmental sustainability. "Good morning, girls. What are you up to?" "Good morning, Dad," they replied in unison without looking up from their posters. Edward smiled. Over the past 3 years, he had gotten used to being called Dad naturally, without formality. He was Mr. Edward only to strangers. To Lucy and Letty, he was simply Dad. And that word never failed to warm his heart. Sarah appeared from the kitchen wearing an apron with flour smudges. They're obsessed with this project. They woke up at 7 on a Saturday to work on it. "It's important, Mum," Lucy said, her eyes still on the poster where she was drawing trees. "The teacher said the best projects will be presented at the city's science fair. We want to be in it. And we're going to win," Letty added with determination. "Our project is about recycling and composting. We even started a compost bin in the backyard." Edward crouched down to get a better look at their work. It was impressive for 10-year-olds. Well-made charts, organized information, an attractive visual presentation. "This looks great. Can I help with anything?" "Can you proofread the text to see if there are any spelling mistakes?" Lucy asked, handing him a sheet filled with her neat handwriting. Edward read it carefully, made a few small corrections, and suggested rephrasing some sentences. The girls absorbed every comment, taking notes, discussing between themselves how to improve. It was fascinating to watch them work together, complementing each other perfectly. Lucy was more analytical, focused on data and facts. Letty was more creative, concerned with the visual presentation and emotional impact. 2 weeks later, on the day of the municipal science fair, the whole family went together to the gymnasium where the event was held. It was huge, with hundreds of projects from schools all over the city. Lucy and Letty set up their booth with help from Edward and Sarah, arranging the posters, the model of the compost bin they had built, and samples of organic fertilizer they had produced in their backyard. Throughout the day, judges walked around evaluating each project. They asked technical questions, tested their knowledge, and analyzed their presentation. The girls answered confidently, demonstrating not only that they had studied the topic, but that they truly cared about it. They spoke passionately about the importance of reducing waste, about how small individual actions could have a collective impact, about the future of the planet. At the end of the day, during the awards ceremony, Lucy and Letty were called to the stage. They had won 2nd place in the elementary school, pairs category. It wasn't the first place they had so badly wanted, but it was a huge achievement. They went on stage beaming, received their certificate and medal, and looked for Sarah and Edward in the audience. When they found them, they waved enthusiastically. Later, on the way home, the girls were a little disappointed about not winning, but Edward and Sarah consoled them, explaining that what mattered wasn't winning, but the learning and the effort. 2nd place among hundreds of projects was a reason for immense pride. "You were incredible," Sarah said from the back seat where she sat with the girls. "Your dad and I are so proud." "It's true," Edward confirmed, looking in the rearview mirror. "And you know what I think this deserves? A celebration. How about we go to that pizza place you like?" The girls perked up immediately, their disappointment forgotten. They spent the evening eating pizza, laughing, reminiscing about funny moments from the fair, and making plans for next year when they would try again. It was in these moments that Edward realized how completely his life had changed. 3 years ago, a Saturday night would have meant being alone in his apartment, maybe working on a report, maybe watching something on TV without paying attention. Now it meant this: noise, mess, laughter, life, and he wouldn't trade it for anything. The following months brought new challenges and joys. Lucy developed an interest in programming and started an online course in computational logic. Letty discovered a passion for drawing and painting, filling the walls of her room with her increasingly elaborate creations. Sarah thrived in her new job, receiving 2 promotions in less than a year. Edward expanded his consulting firm to 3 new states, but continued to prioritize being present in his daughters' lives. One Sunday afternoon, as they were having lunch together at the Yellow House, Letty asked a question that took everyone by surprise. "Dad, have you ever wanted to get married again? Have other kids?" Edward almost choked on his juice. He glanced quickly at Sarah, who seemed as surprised as he was by the question. "Where did that come from, Letty?" "Just curious. You live alone, you're handsome, you have money. There must be a lot of women interested in you." Edward laughed, embarrassed. "Well, maybe, but I'm not looking. I'm happy with how things are." "And you, Mom?" Lucy turned to Sarah. "Don't you want to date anyone either?" Sarah blushed. "Girls, what kind of talk is this? It's just that we thought maybe you two could get together," Letty said with a shrug. "It would be easier. We'd be a normal family." Sarah and Edward exchanged an uncomfortable look. It was a conversation they had never had directly, but it sometimes hung in the air. Was there a possibility of something beyond co-parenting between them? "Look," Edward began, choosing his words carefully. "Your mom and I respect each other very much. We work very well together, taking care of you, but that doesn't mean we need to be a couple. We don't have that kind of feeling for each other. And that's okay," Sarah added. "Not all families have to follow the same model. Ours works just the way it is." "But you don't hate each other, right?" Lucy asked, worried. "Of course not," Edward assured her. "We like each other, as friends, as partners. It's just not romantic love." The girls seemed to accept the explanation, returning to their meal. But the topic had left a strange mood in the air. After lunch, when the twins went to play in the yard, Sarah and Edward were left alone in the kitchen washing dishes. "Sorry if that was awkward," Sarah said, rinsing a plate. "They get these ideas." "No need to apologize." Edward dried the plates she handed him. "But it's interesting, isn't it? How they assume it would be better if we were a couple." "It would be simpler," Sarah admitted. "More conventional, but not necessarily better." "I agree." Edward put the last plate in the cabinet. "Are you happy with how things are?" "I am." Sarah turned to face him. "And you?" "Very. More than I thought possible." "Then it's all good. We don't need to change anything." But the conversation stuck in Edward's mind in the following days. Was it really impossible? He and Sarah had so much in common now. They spent so much time together. They worked so well as a team. But whenever he tried to imagine a romantic scenario between them, something didn't fit. The chemistry just wasn't there. And that was okay. Not all stories had to end in romance. Theirs had ended in something perhaps even more valuable: family, partnership, mutual respect. The school year progressed. The girls participated in math competitions, theater performances, and school games. Sarah was promoted again, now to logistics coordinator. Edward closed the biggest contract in the history of his consulting firm. Everyone's life was thriving. One Saturday in June, exactly 3.5 years after that first meeting at the school spring festival, Edward arrived at the Yellow House with important news. He gathered Sarah, Lucy, and Letty in the living room and announced that he wanted to take a family trip. "Where to?" Letty asked, excited. "Disney World, Orlando. 2 weeks during the July break." The girls screamed with joy, jumping up and down and hugging Edward. Sarah was more restrained but clearly moved. "We've never traveled out of the country," she said quietly. "Well, now we are. The 4 of us." Edward smiled. "I've already bought the tickets, booked the hotel, everything. We just need to get the girls' passports." It was a rush to get all the documentation in time, but they managed. In July, they boarded a direct flight from Chicago to Orlando. The girls were ecstatic. It was their first time on a plane. They spent the entire flight with their faces pressed against the window, watching the clouds, taking pictures of everything. In Orlando, they stayed at a resort near the parks. Edward had booked a 2-bedroom suite, one for him and one for Sarah and the girls. In the following days, they visited Magic Kingdom, Epcot, Hollywood Studios, and Animal Kingdom. The twins rode roller coasters for the first time, met Disney characters, ate cotton candy until they felt sick, and bought Mickey Mouse ears that they wore the entire time. Edward took thousands of photos. Sarah, usually reserved, relaxed completely, laughing at her daughter's antics, trying out thrill rides, and wearing a ridiculous hat that Lucy insisted she buy. It was just the four of them, in a bubble of happiness far from the worries of daily life. One evening, after the girls had fallen asleep, exhausted from all the walking, Edward and Sarah sat on the room's balcony, overlooking the resort's artificial lake. They drank red wine that Edward had bought at a hotel shop, listening to the distant sound of the Magic Kingdom fireworks. "Thank you for this," Sarah said, looking at the night sky. "You didn't have to. I wanted to. You three deserve it. It's still surreal sometimes." Sarah shook her head. "To think about how everything has changed, how 4 years ago I could barely pay the rent and now I'm here, at Disney World, with my daughters and with you. Life takes strange turns. It really does." Sarah took a sip of wine. "Do you regret anything? About how everything happened?" Edward thought honestly before answering. "I regret not knowing from the beginning, missing their first years, but I don't regret how things are now, what we've built together." "Me neither." Sarah smiled. "You're a better father than I ever imagined anyone could be. And you're an incredible mother. The girls are lucky to have you. They're lucky to have both of us." They fell silent, each lost in thought. Then Edward spoke again. "Have you thought about the future? About what will happen when they're really grown up? Teenagers, college, adult life. I think about it all the time. It scares me and excites me at the same time." "Me too. But I know that whatever comes, we'll face it together, like we always have." "Like we always will," Sarah agreed.